Welcome, everybody. My name is Elise Denorfia. I am the Leadership Development Coordinator and member of the Kiwanis Club of New England and Bermuda. Welcome to tonight's session. It's great to see all of you here on Zoom, and welcome to those who are watching it live on Facebook. This is the fourth session in our 2021-2022 virtual workshop series. This is a reminder that all of our workshops have the potential to count as interclubs on your monthly secretary report. If your club has enough members attending this workshop, you can report an interclub with each individual club in attendance. To help everyone determine the number of interclubs that they can report, we ask all attendees to send a quick message in the chat with your name and the club that you belong to. If your club is eligible for an interclub, you can either write down the names of clubs in attendance, click the ... in the chat to save the chat so you can review the club names later, or you can visit our Google Drive of resources for a list of clubs represented at each workshop, which is compiled by our committee's fabulous interclub liaison, David Griffin. You can always find a link to that folder in your RSVP email or in the Linktree link that I'm going to post later on in the workshop. So before we start tonight's workshop, just some brief housekeeping things. We're going to ask everyone to stay muted unless our presenter asks you to unmute so that we can make sure we have an uninterrupted presentation. If you're comfortable with it, you can feel free to keep your camera on. It's nice to see everyone's faces, but obviously that is not required. If you have any questions for tonight's presenter, please post them in the chat. You can send them directly to me or send them to everybody. I will read them to our presenter at the end of our workshop. If you're watching on Facebook, you can comment on the live stream with your questions, and we'll make sure to have enough time at the end to answer everything that you ask. Tonight's presentation will be about 1 hour, and all of the recordings from our virtual workshops are on our district Facebook page, in our district Facebook group, and on our YouTube channel. So let's get started. Our speaker tonight is Karl. Karl Uzcategui is both our district editor that produces the district publication called The Kiwanian, and the chair of our Social Change and Equity Committee. Karl is a product of our service leadership programs, serving both Key Club and Circle K on the club, district, and international level, depending on which branch we're talking about. And Karl works in higher education at Fairfield University in Southern Connecticut. And his topic tonight is diversity. As Social Change and Equity Chair, I think it's a passion of Karl's, and Karl is a great professor. He likes to make sure everybody is walking away with something to learn. He's not actually a professor by trade, but if you've ever been in a meeting with him, you would know that there is a lot of education that gets presented. Tonight's workshop is intended to be an introductory session on inclusive language, an overview of pronouns, and creating safe spaces for brave conversations during Kiwanis Club meetings. So the content provided during this session serves as a starting point for individuals to begin exploring how to promote a sense of belonging with those they work with those they partner with. And I'd like to point out, this is not something that Karl said, this is me kind of speaking anecdotally. If you're looking to recruit younger members into your clubs, there is going to be a conversation about diversity at some point. It's something that is very important to different generations. So we want to make sure that we are talking about it all the time. So with that, I will pass it over to Karl.
Awesome. Thank you, Elise. And hello, everyone. It's great to see so many friendly and familiar faces. So as Elise said previously, my name is Karl Uzcategui, and I am the president of the Kiwanis of New England and Bermuda. And insert everything else, So today I will be talking a little bit about inclusive clubs and really the matter behind inclusive clubs. So I'm going to give you some really reflective questions to think about. If you hated philosophy in your studies and college, I'm sorry. There might be some questions in there that you're going to hear. So I'm very big on reflective exercises. So they'll be sprinkled out through. But let me get started and share with you tonight's presentation. So first and foremost, as Elise said, my name is Karl and I work at Fairfield University, which is a Jesuit institution. So through Ignatian or Jesuit theory, we often explore with our students the following questions. Who am I, whose am I, and what am I called to be? So sitting here thinking about those words, I am drawn to them. I'm reminded about the people that I've grown up with, the life that I've had, the generations and cultures that have been passed down to me by my friends and family, by my ancestry. So for those that don't know, I am a multiracial first generation student and professional. I was born and raised here in the States, but both of my parents are from South America. I believe that every child should be able to live a life free of worry of social and societal limitations, preventing them from really experiencing a full reality. I grew up in a Caribbean household where I did not necessarily know the concepts of poverty, inequality, or gender roles that surrounded me, yet struggled with those very concepts in my early adulthood. A key measure um, of the odds could have easily swayed against me was when my father became sick my final year in undergrad, later to be in a coma for 5 months, and then diagnosed with a rare blood disease. Anything like that could have easily made someone that was, normal, probably fall through the cracks. But that did not prevent me from persevering forward and finishing up my studies. Today, as I focus on my family and my work, I continue to search and advocate for a better tomorrow for those in the margins with intersectional identities like myself, so that we can build successful communities. And knowing all of this really, I hope, takes shape in understanding that every Kiwanian out there has a story and has a different purpose and reason for being in our organization. We all share different identities and we all share and revel in the communities that we serve. So I want to acknowledge that being here today, hearing even that snippet, shows your commitment to diversity and inclusion. We won't get to a ton, but we shall scratch the surface and the steps needed to build inclusive spaces, and it all starts with a story. So for today, our intentions are pretty simple, or as simple can be. We're going to assume best intentions when hearing the narratives and hearing our own internal stories. We will respect one another for the beliefs that are shared, and we'll ask questions or think of questions. So I promised that the first thing that I would have for you was a reflective thought. So to break some ice for you all, take a look at the prompt that's on your screen and try to fill in the blanks. And if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to share your narrative in the chat. So for those that like fill in the blanks, you're gonna have fun with this. For those that don't, humor me and you can listen in as we move forward, but take a moment, see what you would fill in for this passage. And this is a great way to start off your meetings as well. It's actually pretty funny that Elise was mentioning my time in Key Club and Circle K, because usually in the service leadership programs, we like to start off like the first meeting of the school year with kind of either like a survey or something like bingo or some activity to get people to get to know each other. So when you look at this prompt on the screen, you'll notice that there's a few things. It's asking you what's the person's name, what's the person's identity, what are some skills they have, what are some hobbies. Those are the very questions that we might have on a new member survey or a new member experience or activity, right? But we've taken that form and put it into something that now can be shared with other people. When we look at this activity, I wonder what word you might think of. For me, this activity reminds me of self-awareness. And when we think of self-awareness, it is at the heart of any leader. It is important to know who we are. So just as important as this activity is for you to get to know somebody else, this activity is equally important when you think about you learning about yourself. How often do we sit down and really think about what is our name? What do we identify with? What are our hobbies? What are our strengths? These are members in our club that are also going through these same matters, thinking about these things, how are we incorporating that into our club to really think about what are we doing to make this inclusive and fun and engaging? And we first need to know that about ourselves so that we're able to share that with our members. So any diversity leader, especially looking to be ahead of the curve, looks at self-awareness as a skill, as a strength. No matter the person, we all have biases. We may discriminate without even recognizing it. We learn to move beyond these behaviors when we look at ourselves and begin to examine why we do what we do. And we do that through knowing who we are. So you'd be surprised how many college students I work with on the day. They could be well into their early to mid 20s and have no idea who they are. Now talk about somebody that's older that doesn't know who they are. That's something really to think about. These are our members that could be also struggling the same. So once again, if you didn't like philosophy, bear with me, but I have some videos built in, but I'm not going to show them because I know this goes on YouTube and I don't want to demonetize it. So if you hear like weird sounds in the background, bear with me. But looking at our purpose, it's important. We just talked about who we are. Now we're looking at what is our purpose? What is our purpose as an organization? So to get that started, think about what your why is. What is your Kiwanis why? What brings us together as a group? So if you feel inclined, feel free. You can put it in the chat if you want, or you can just think about it. I love the head nods. It shows that you're really into it. Think about what is your why? Why did you join Kiwanis? Why do you serve? Why are you supporting the children of the world? When we look at our purpose as Kiwanians, we have to look at two key things. Well, there's more things, but for now, just two things. What is our mission as Kiwanis and what is our vision? So just so for those that might be listening in and not seeing what the screen is, the Kiwanis mission is to be a global organization of volunteers dedicated to improving the world one child and one community at a time. We do this through our vision. Kiwanis will be a positive influence in communities worldwide so that one day all children will wake up in communities that believe in them, nurture them, and provide them the support they need to thrive. Take a moment and really let that soak in. Too often, maybe be doing service, and we might get lost and forget our purpose of why we're doing this work. First, we talked about who we are. Now we talk about why we do what we do. As we move forward, you'll start to see that as we unravel the identity of Kiwanis, we start to learn how to bring in more individuals to be members of Kiwanis. Because once again, you can't expect people to come towards you if they don't know who you are. And you can't expect people to know who you are if you don't know who you are. So just a lot of deep thoughts, right? Something more tangible, because I don't want to be too reflective. There's some hard hitters in the room that are like, okay, what are some facts? So let's look at the makeup of our clubs. We work with diverse organizations in our communities. Our service is done to support all different backgrounds. We make generational connections on the daily through our SLP programs like Circle K, Key Club, Builders Club, and K Kids. We do projects that financially support the community, different charities. I always get amazed the amount of duck runs and mud pies and all the fun charity events that are happening. And those are things that we as Kiwanians, we get inspired when we hear those things, right? The past years might have been unlike we have seen in recent times. We can all agree, though, that the need for service has only increased over the years, and it is up to us to determine how to work through these matters through diverse solutions. So we're looking at Kiwanis at work, the different elements that make up Kiwanis. If we look further, what are some of the things that, as we continue to look at Kiwanis, we can break things down even further. When we look at our members, we talk about our members are individuals that care about their homes, and they are the ones that call themselves Kiwanians. The experience of being a Kiwanis member means providing activities and conversation to build positive experiences for not only our members, but those in the community. We typically do that through service projects, right? We might be mingling with the person next to us, getting to know them, getting to know who they are, why they're doing the service project, getting that narrative. So, but we're not only learning about the Kiwanis members at those service projects, we're learning about the people in our community when we're there. So we're looking at the community as a whole, who comes from all different walks of life, and we're there to help serve them. And it's really important that if we don't know the Kiwanis makeup, then we can't begin to start doing the work needed to build an inclusive club or inclusive communities. And I know I have veterans in the room. I've been part of Kiwanis for over a decade now. And I know that the work that we do evolves constantly, but the people we serve and the communities we serve may also evolve in little micro ways. And it's important to know the distinctions that we notice so that we're able to evolve with them. We're looking at Kiwanis for the future. And the future means also knowing what's happening today. So a little bit more tangibles. When we talk about creating social change happens different in each club. But above are some of the steps that you can take in your clubs to really support inclusive clubs. Look at your local impact. What is currently being done at the local level? What are some needs in your community? What are some things that are unique to just Kiwanis? Create an inclusive policy. You can review the KI inclusive statement and determine ways that you can implement it in your own club. In a moment, I'll share with you a snippet. And then you can determine on your own in your leadership role or as a member, how can I as an individual make this a statement known in our club, whether that be something written or said, that people will constantly remember that Kiwanis is here and with open arms. Create an education plan. Educate members about differences, vocabulary, pronouns, biases. Think about what is lacking in your club and bring some type of education there so that when people feel inclined and drift off, that they know that there's a way to bring them back in. So for instance, I'm sure we've all been in an uncomfortable situation where somebody might have said something, whether that be at a meeting or a social, that we just felt a certain way. Instead of brushing that under the rug, see if that's a reoccurring issue. Is it happening with other members in the club? Is it widestream? How can you bring some education into that club meeting in the future so that people know what they're doing can be improved rather? And last but not least, honor and share. Share information about what you have been doing as a club. Too often do we take too much time worrying about what we aren't doing, and we forget to celebrate what we are doing. And through celebrating, and I know Gayla would probably be loving my next statement. When we talk about sharing, we're talking about sharing our whole selves through PR, marketing, social media, all these fun things. We need to let people know who we are as Kiwanians, and we need to share what we're doing so that people know who Kiwanis is. So I said I would share with you a snippet about the KI's stance on diversity. So some may be wondering, why are we focusing on this topic of diversity, equity, inclusion as Kiwanians? Is this not a political matter? In 2008, delegates at the Kiwanis International Convention adopted a resolution that encourages and empowers clubs to create environments that develop and nurture mutual respect for all and celebrates the inclusiveness of all Kiwanis members. The language reads, "Therefore be it resolved that the delegates assembled at the 2008 Kiwanis International Convention in Orlando, Florida, and all Kiwanis leaders and members take action to create a culture and club environment that develops and nurtures mutual respect for all and celebrates the inclusiveness of beloved Kiwanians." So under the flag, the Kiwanis flag, we can go back to our why and know we are doing our work, this work, towards the advancement of our communities and our children. And to do our work in the service of children of the world, we must know who they are, who those children are, know our communities, and in turn, welcome them with open arms. So I mentioned something in the previous slide about pronouns. When we think about language, we know how important it is as a society to have common language. To be able to articulate our being, our feeling, and our way of life is to foster common ground. We create common ground through common language or shared speech. We often, as previously discussed, educating your members. What are pronouns? Often people make assumptions about the gender of another person based on a person's appearance or name. These assumptions aren't always correct, and the act of making an assumption, even if correct, sends a potential harmful message. This message that people have to look a certain way to demonstrate their identity. Using someone's correct personal pronoun is a way to respect them and create an inclusive environment, just as using a person's name can be a way to respect them. Just as it can be offensive to make a nickname for someone and call them that nickname against their will, it can be offensive to guess at someone's pronouns and refer to them using pronouns that they have not identified with. So that's a snippet. Everything this evening are just snippets of things. And hopefully you're coming up with some hard questions for me at the end, but we're not done yet. Let's take a moment and look at our Kiwanis objectives. So the 6 permanent objectives of Kiwanis International were approved by Kiwanis clubs at the 1924 delegation at the International Convention in Denver, Colorado. Through the decades, they have remained unchanged. It takes 6 objectives to be able to convey what our organization is. Think about that. It takes 6 objectives. And we previously just talked about having common language to be able to express ourselves. In Kiwanis, these objectives would be considered common language. Now imagine that these objectives were unwritten. We must remember that every concept, even that of Kiwanis, took someone expressing themselves to be seen, heard, and accepted. And let me repeat that. We must remember that every concept, even that of Kiwanis, took someone expressing themselves to be seen, heard, and accepted. So let that soak in for a moment. Making mistakes will happen. When we try not to offend someone, we are putting ourselves before them, and that shouldn't be the case. When you're going through making inclusive clubs, inclusive policies, inclusive service, all of these things, you're bound to run into bumps in the road. Nothing's going to happen perfectly. But remember, when you start getting that upset feeling, that defensiveness, don't let that project onto the person in front of you or to the people you're trying to serve. Once again, when we try not to offend people, we are putting ourselves first. If we are committed to equity and inclusion, then we do not get to be defensive, because each mistake and each time someone gives us feedback is an opportunity for us to learn, grow, and become better allies. It's about listening to understand instead of being understood. So, and as an Aries myself, who's very stubborn, this is a very hard pill to swallow, but it is something just to be very intentional on. Whenever we're doing an act of service, whenever we're doing something to make something better, it's about understanding and not trying to be understood. So, how do you be a Kiwanis ally? Remember that allies are some of the most effective and powerful voices for social change. They help others understand the importance of equity, fairness, acceptance, and mutual respect. So if you're looking to be a Kiwanis ally, someone that brings in and creates inclusive clubs, inclusive environments, you must educate yourself like you are tonight. Pay attention to your language, like we talked about with pronouns, but there's a ton of other things with language, as you already know. Check yourself at the door, meaning check your own biases and assumptions. We all have them, and they're bound to rear their ugly heads when we don't want them to happen. But if we're more intentional, if we know who we are and we know what we're doing, and we're just being mindful in the moment, we can check our biases so that they aren't affecting how things are going for the person in front of us, and we can learn from them. Ask how you can help. So you certainly know that there is a district social change and equity committee now. There's many other committees throughout the district. When as Kiwanians, we're always looking for ways to help and support and to serve. So take that same mindset when you're looking to better your club, to better yourself, and ask yourself, how can I help to improve? How can I make things better? Never force your vision onto others. This was something that I definitely struggled with throughout all of my leadership positions, because I'm sure everybody's heard or had that club president, right? Maybe, hopefully that's not me right now, that has all these ideas, right? They come in, they're ready to go, and it doesn't match the mix of the club. They're putting too much at once. Remember, when we're making decisions as Kiwanis leaders, we have to be mindful of the community and the group that we're in. And we can't just put everything into one bin and hope that it works out. Advocate for change. It doesn't have to be a ton of change. Maybe it's something as simple as updating how you start your meetings. I know for years, my local Kiwanis club, love them to pieces. They always started their meetings off with a, I'm forgetting the name specifically, but I know it's like happy and sad change. Some people have. So they started every single meeting like that. And by no means am I trying to say, take that away, because I see some of you, you're like, oh my gosh, she's trying to take away my happy dollars. Nope, nope, I want you to be happy. But find ways that you can maybe incorporate that in a different fashion. So maybe instead of coins for happy things happening in your life, maybe you're giving dollars now for things that you've witnessed that brought you a smile this week or made you laugh. You can change the prompt to still keep that true Kiwanis identity, but making people feel that sense of surprise when they're coming back to meetings each and every time. So simple things. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking, and you don't have to pull the rug out of what you're doing, because the things we do as Kiwanians are rooted in tradition. And remember, when you notice that there's that bubbling inside of you, or that discomfort inside of you, maybe you're experiencing a microaggression from yourself, you're doing something that's triggering you, take a moment, take a step back, think about what's going on, reflect, and then move forward. So, and last but not least, I have one more fun thing for you before we go into questioning. So lots of time for questions. I talk really fast, so I'm trying to be intentional of talking as slow as I can. So if I'm going too fast for anyone, I feel like at this point it's too late, but just like whale me down. But so the last topic of tonight is on the concept of equity, because as you know, the committee that I oversee is the Social Change and Equity Committee. Not too many people know what equity means, though. They kind of have this weird perception. Well, anything would be weird if you've never heard of a word before, right? It'd be uncomfortable or out there. So I thought I would take a moment as we're talking about building inclusive clubs to talk about what it is that we're talking towards. So when you look on the screen, and please feel free to put in the chat if you'd like, some of the things that you're seeing from these pictures, just the pictures, don't mind the words quite yet. If you've already drifted towards the words, that's fine, but think about what you're seeing. And I'll give some examples for those that might be on their phones or not away from their screens. I'm seeing fences. I'm seeing some children standing on boxes. I see a baseball game playing in the background. I almost said basketball. I would have gotten some sports fans upset. And I'm seeing a lot of just like it's a full scene. It kind of almost reminds me of like some of those movies where like the kids are standing on the outside of the stadium watching the game. So, but something really important to be mindful of when we look at the first three. So the first three is equality, equity, and justice. When we look at equality, we see in the highlighted part, everyone benefits from the same support. So in the first picture, we see that the two kids are shorter. So they gave a box to kid 1 and kid 2. Kid 2 is still upset because they can't see the game because they're still too short to see over the fence. In the second picture, when we look at equity, it says everyone gets the support they need. So now kid 2 has 2 boxes and they're able to see over the fence to watch the game. So when we look at the first two, we can see equality. We gave the same outcome to each child, but the second child still did not have enough to see over that fence. With equality, we saw that we gave kid 2 2 boxes, and now they were tall enough to see over that fence. We gave them a little bit more so that they had the same outcome. Now, when we look at justice, it says the causes of the inequality was addressed. So when we look at the issue, someone could say the issue was that the fence was blocking the children from watching the game. And I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. When you change the fence into a checkered fence, well, now everyone can see over the game. However, I'm sure some of you are already thinking this way. If you've ever looked through a checkered wired fence, it's still a little hard to see, right? You're still not able to get the full picture because now there's like things in the way. So when we look at the last box, when we look at agency, we see that now everyone, the whole family, is able to sit in the stadium to watch the game without any issue of seeing anything. So, and in the highlighted part, it says they're now able to buy their own seat inside the stadium. So, as provided by the Training for the Real World company, so that's where the image came from, agency is defined as the capacity of individuals to act independently and to make their own free choice. So building those foundational pieces, when we talk about health, education, wealth, support, the things that were affecting the family, we start to see why this is more than just a one simple answer when we talk about inclusion. And as Kiwanians, aren't we building that sense of agency through the projects that we're already doing? When we look at eliminate, iodine deficiency, water, sanitation, and hygiene, isn't this all about providing the resources needed so that the communities that we're supporting have what they need to thrive and to move forward? Remember, following that Kiwanis mission. So when we talk about agency, we are all agents of change trying to support different communities so that we're kind of in the business of running us out of business. The goal probably should always be that a Kiwanis Club is around until it doesn't need to because the issues have been solved. That every child has a book to read, every child has a home to go to, every child has the necessary clothing and water and support. And so we're in the business of running ourselves out of business. We haven't reached that point yet. And I kind of would be getting too off track if I said, I hope we never get to that point, because ideally we would get to that point. We would just have to figure out something else. But there are many children in our communities that require our support. And it is important for us to know the basics of what they're going through if we hope to support them. So as you can see, with social change and equity, we're not completely there yet, and we acknowledge that, but we're working towards a better day where we aren't needed, and that the children and the families we support are able to see and sustain a thriving life on their own. So, and that is the work of Kiwanis. So hopefully I didn't make anyone too sleepy, but as we move into questioning, I have some questions. Once again, philosophy, forgive me. I didn't even study philosophy, but some things to just think about as we head into questioning. Think about, do you know your why? Do you know your Kiwanis why? Do you know your why for DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion? Why do we serve? How much time do you spend learning about social events that are happening that are impacting children, whether that be in your communities or globally? Are you willing to hold others accountable for DEI progress and impact? When somebody says something that's uncomfortable, are you addressing it? Are you fixing it? Are you bringing someone in to talk through why that wasn't okay? Maybe that's me, maybe not. But, and the last thing to really think about, because it's really important when it comes to self-care, how are you keeping your spirits up when this work, whether that be diversity and inclusion work, whether that be the work of a Kiwanian, how do you keep your spirits up when the work gets exhausting? Because when you give your all to the work that you're doing, at some point it will get exhausting. And how are you filling that bucket back up so that you can keep doing good in the world, because the world needs Kiwanis. So thank you everyone for listening through my presentation today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And if you can't think of it now, but you think of it later, my email's on the screen, and I'll put it into the chat in a second, but I appreciate your time and I'll pass it over to Elise.
Thank you, Karl. We do have some questions that came through in the chat. Let me just, let me spotlight you. There we go. So now everybody can see your face. We have a couple questions. Some are along the same theme, so I might kind of consolidate them as we go. Maybe I'll ask them separately. Not quite sure yet. We're gonna play it by ear. So first question, can you explain what you meant in your introduction when you spoke about your intersectional upbringing? Can you kind of explain what you meant by intersectionality in that context?
Yeah, certainly. So for those that don't know the term intersectionality, just so that I try to keep it as lax as I can be, everyone's made up of different identities. And how those identities intersect makes up the person. So for instance, when you look at me, you probably notice I'm male, maybe or not you notice I'm Caribbean, Spanish, and like those are the firm identities that you immediately may notice. And because we're looking at different identities, many of those identities may be seen as marginalized or less than for whatever reason. And because of that, somebody that has many different intersectional identities may experience life differently or they may experience life less to the fullest because they have so many things built on top of them. So it's really important when we talk about working with children or students or whoever, um, everyone has different identities, how they intersect, make up them as a person. And that's knowing that you're able to understand a little bit of how they might navigate their everyday. So that's where I was alluding. Did I answer that right? Did I get everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. There were a couple questions in this same topic. So my club is a very traditional Kiwanis club. What are some small changes that we can implement to make our club appeal to more diverse members?
Ooh, I mean, I'll try to take a stab at that. Obviously, everyone has like their own different ways of doing things. So I think that, well, there's a couple of things. So when we look at, for instance, a younger member, and I've noticed this, not from experience necessarily, because I'm trying not to get in trouble with Elise, but, but I'm joking. I've definitely seen though, with youth, sometimes, once again, when we look at that intersectionality, one of those intersections could be age. And sometimes people may think that because somebody has a certain identity, whether that be age or whatnot, that they're less than, right? So when we talk about youth or bringing younger members into the club, we have to remember that when we have individuals that have ideas or have suggestions or want to change something, we have to find ways to encourage that and support them and make sure that they feel heard and understood. And that goes for like anything really. Like everybody's trying to be heard and understood. But I think that sometimes we forget to really bring the person in to make them feel that they can bring themselves forward and be their whole self. Um, and doing some of these activities and maybe more fun. These are a little bit more, you know, thought provoking. I don't know, but like having fun activities, socializing, having people understand who you are underneath it all, and being just your authentic self to them will encourage others like the younger members to be like, oh, this is a person that cares about their community, that wants to see good, and is willing to hear me out. Like that's a good concoction. Well, we like our drinks and Kiwanis, right? That's a good concoction to get a member to stay. And it's committing to, sometimes they're going to suggest things that might be uncomfortable, and sometimes you might have to do things yourself that are a little bit uncomfortable and change things up a little bit. But it doesn't have to be massive and it doesn't have to happen overnight. So using that same example I used earlier, with changing up how you start the meeting. If your club, for instance, starts a meeting every time with the same activity, see how you can tweak it to still get the same concept in, but just make it a little bit different. So I'm trying to be very intentional because I don't want people to feel that by any means am I saying just get rid of anything, because that defeats the purpose. Like we wouldn't be 100-year-old organization if we didn't root ourselves in tradition. But tradition doesn't mean that it has to be the same every year. Just like, for instance, like we just celebrated Christmas and we decorate differently every year. We're still honoring that holiday, but it doesn't look the same every time. It adapts with the family and the season. So that's just the mentality you have to go in with when you're navigating through some of these uncomfortable transitions, if you will.
Okay, great. There are a whole lot of questions in this area. So maybe I'll ask them all at once and you can kind of, because they're slightly different iterations, but maybe I think you can probably sum them up a little bit. How do I address comments or traditions in a respectful way? For example, I have a club member who sometimes tells inappropriate jokes at meetings, as we used to 30 years ago, and it's probably not appropriate now. How do I address that in a respectful way? how does one respect multiple generations at once? For example, older Latinos or Latinas might not agree with the term Latinx or Latin. So how would I navigate that? Yeah, those can go together.
Okay. So I guess, so because the second one is more prevalent. So for those that don't know, I was advising our on-campus Latinx student union. So the students themselves made the decision that they were going to change it from, it was something else, and then it was Latin student, and then they went to Latinx student union. So the same conversation came up with, what if people aren't comfortable with the use of that language? And certainly, I think it's one of those things where if you are uncomfortable having it used towards yourself, it's being mindful that it's in a different context when addressing the person in front of you. So if that, for instance, the person in front of you identifies as Latinx, that does not change who you are as a person when you're addressing them in a respectful manner to how they would like to be addressed. Just like how if you yourself were like, Karl, I don't want to be identified with this title or whatever, I'd be like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'll try my best. But just know that's not what I want to be called, because I don't feel comfortable. The alternative certainly could be also, you just don't, as long as it's not something like, for instance, like someone's like name, and it's more so just like a general classification, then you can certainly just address the person in another fashion. So like, I'm going back to like the pronouns, for instance. Maybe you have a really hard time switching in your mind, or you really have a hard time digesting pronouns. Well, that's okay. Everything takes time, but also there's nothing wrong with calling the person by their name, right? So it's one of those things to help shift how you can make that situation comfortable for both of you. And that kind of transitions a little bit more to the first question that was asked, with some of the older members saying like uncomfortable jokes. I've known Kiwanis clubs that have lost several members, many of them female, especially because of poor jokes made by older males in the club. So, and it's really unfortunate because once, like going back to it, when we talk about our mission, our vision, our purpose, our why, like those people came for a reason. So it's really important when things like that happen to reach out to that person that's making the situation uncomfortable, as a friend, as a peer, and say, and speak your mind. Like, this is like another family member. This is a family member that you're addressing. It's not a stranger. This is a member of your club, a member of the Kiwanis family. And as uncomfortable as it may be, talking to them as you would normally and saying like, hey, I've noticed this has been happening. How can we make this so that other people aren't feeling uncomfortable? And that might make them feel a little uncomfortable, right? Like, nobody likes to be called out with things, but nothing will ever change unless it's been addressed. And certainly I'm taking the direct approach in this. There's many different approaches that you can do. But as we know, being direct and coming from a place of love and kindness will be how we're able to really resolve and address the situation. And I'm sure some of you are like, I might address it and they might leave. And you know, I'm stubborn, so take what I say next as a grain of salt. There will be some members that will be okay with that because they're also not making the space welcoming for others. So it's one of those things that it's a toss up, right? How much do you put in? But remember, and I've always told this to people, by no means am I telling everyone in this room to leave, but even when a member of our Kiwanis club leaves or moves or whatever, they're still a member of our family. And the memories that we've shared are still there. And sometimes we grow out of things as well, and we grow into things. So that the normancy, that family concept, we have to remember when we're members of Kiwanis, and use that when addressing those uncomfortable situations. So hopefully I answer that. I know it's not perfect, and I'm probably going to think about it later and be like, oh, I wish I said this, but that's what I got right now.
The Q&A is really good at putting you on the spot and making you think on your feet. So, okay. What do I do if I'm trying to be careful not to offend, but end up saying the wrong thing?
I think it goes back to that, the slide prior to the last, where we're all going to make mistakes. Whether it be the work of diversity or inclusion, or even just meeting a new member, like meeting a new person. When mistakes are made, sincerely apologize, but don't linger. Learn from that one mistake and move forward. Because when like for instance, if I say the wrong pronoun to someone and I start getting defensive and really upset, and I'm like, I'm sorry, and like I'm a horrible person, like that's trying, at that point, you're only validating yourself, because the person in front of you has been the one that was just maybe hurt or upset by the comment, but now you're getting emotional, and that's not changing the fact that you've just did something that could have upset someone else. So it's important that when mistakes are made, take a quick moment, apologize sincerely, acknowledge, and move forward and learn from that mistake. Because then if you constantly get into that upset mindset, it's just going to cause a cycle of every single time you make a mistake, you're not learning from it. It's kind of like think of like that parent mentality. When our parents used to be mad at us, they wouldn't be happy if we were crying or being disrespectful, or if we kept doing the same thing over. They would say, learn from that mistake, and figure out how you can make sure it doesn't happen again. I'm obviously making it a little bit more lighthearted, maybe sugarcoating it a little bit, but we have to know that mistakes will happen, and that's okay. So I think that's really important to really acknowledge.
Great. Can you give an example of what you mean when you say microaggression and macroaggression?
Mm-hmm. So I always get this wrong. So I'm definitely going to get parts of it wrong. And I'm going to say, always fact check your presenter and always look things up, because that's part of the allyship, right? Educate. But basically, when we talk about micro and macroaggressions, we're talking about when you intentionally or unintentionally do something to somebody else because of your perception. So for instance, if you've ever, I'm trying to think of, so for instance, if you've ever walked into a store and then I'm like thinking through it. Scratch that. Say that you're going to a service project and you start gravitating towards the one group of kids that remind you of what you were doing when you were their age. So maybe you go to they're playing basketball, you love basketball, you remember those days, and then you forget to hang out with the other kids on the field that are playing other sports and other activities. That might be something that, like from a bias standpoint, you're doing bias, right? So that's you can't talk about like microaggressions without talking about bias. So I want everyone to know bias concept first. So then say a parent comes up to you, you don't know the parent, and then they start talking to you about the school board, I don't know, and you start getting very upset and very hurt, and you walk away huffing and puffing, but you're unsure like why. Like they didn't do anything wrong, they were just talking about the local meeting, right? And then you walk away, you're like really upset, and you're like, huh. You take a moment. This is where you were actually practicing what I said earlier, right? You take a moment, you're like, why am I upset? And then you realize you're upset because the local school board when you were there, you never felt that they did anything to help you to be successful as a child. Like they never gave you enough books or pencils or heard like the issues that were happening on the baseball field or whatever. You got triggered, right? So, and that might be a bad example, but I think when we talk about like aggressions, um, it's usually very hidden. You'll never know when you get triggered. And those three elements are important concepts to know when we talk about microaggressions, biases, and triggers. You need to know how you're feeling in that moment because that affects what you're doing to the person in front of you, whether that be good or bad. And usually with microaggressions, it's bad. So somebody can ask me that later and I'll probably come up with a more eloquent answer.
If you see an instance of someone maybe doing a microaggression in your club, do you have any good tips on how to address that, how to be a better ally to your club members?
So I used to have to do this. Obviously now I'm in online circles, so it's a little bit harder to get that or to, well, I guess it's not too hard, but we have a good group, join Kiwanis. But for like, say like you have a member that's a close friend and you notice that they get really upset with the one of the newer members, right? Or one of the members on your board. They're always really hard on that person. And we know from aggressions, it could be for whatever reason, but they're just being really hard. When you could pull them aside once again and say like, hey, I've noticed that this has been happening. You've been getting really loud at like Julie when she's trying to share her thoughts, like what's going on. And maybe they don't even realize what they're doing. They might not even understand what actions they're doing or what they're saying that's getting the other person upset or feeling diminished or whatever it may be. But it's bringing to the attention of that person and say, hey, like I'm noticing this, like it's not okay. If you're not comfortable with that, there's many other things that you can do. The other thing that you could do as well is reach out to the other person that you're noticing that they're getting affected. So using that Julie example again, you could reach out to Julie and say, hey, Julie, I noticed that Elise is getting really loud whenever you bring up an idea. How are you doing? Are you feeling good? Is this something that you want to like bring up? Like, do you feel comfortable? Like, what can I do to be that support for you? So I think at the end of the day, there's many different ways to do, but it's making sure that that member feels a part of the family, feels a part of the group, and feels heard. So however you can get that done is how it's going to ideally resolve in itself. If Julie feels empowered and feels like heard and says, oh, Karl reached out to me and now I feel a little bit more comfortable reaching out to Elise to talk through this, or maybe Karl reaches out to Elise and say, Elise, I'm noticing this, and then they're able to talk with one another and resolve it. Every situation will look differently, but we can work through some of it by just having that initial conversation. And that initial conversation might not be perfect, but we can at least try. And if there's mistakes made or other things, we learn from them and move forward. So I feel like I should get a shirt that says that.
Sounds good.
Mhm.
We have one final question for you that came in the chat. Are different equity and justice interventions needed at different life stages? So for example, primary school, middle school, high school, college, workplace, marriage and relationships.
Well, that's a hard one. I think it among many things, it depends on the situation. But for instance, if we use the example of like a queer student, right? Um, uh, the concept of like a queer student, or for those that are um, don't like that term, like a gay or lesbian individual, that sounds weirder to say for me. But for that student, for instance, that's still learning about themselves. They're going through their schooling, they're still learning about who they are as a person, and they're trying to figure out what makes sense. From a young age, for instance, when we talk about like a younger child, maybe in like elementary or middle, who is constantly being told you have to be a certain way, you have to look or dress a certain way. Certainly that would be an intervention to say, well, what if they start acting up because they're not happy with the clothes that they're receiving? They might be experiencing their own little microaggression, right? Where it's like they're just throwing everything out because they hate it, but they don't really know how to process it. They're too little, they don't know. And then we talk about maybe an older child in like high school, that we could talk about like the same child now learning that they're slightly maybe different than like mainstream, if you will. And they need just the general support of feeling accepted. So maybe for the younger child, it was feeling heard. For the older child, now it's feeling accepted. And we all know how like community, society expects certain things from individuals, from people, and how we navigate and support that student or that person will change depending on what their needs are, their age, and the support services that they have presently. So like, for instance, if we transition that same child, now they're in college, they have really no one because maybe their families or whatnot don't talk to them. And I'm not projecting, my family's crazy over there. So, but things like that, when we like talk about like that transition, right, of like that growth of the person, that person in college might end up needing something a little bit more support than the child. Maybe the person in college needs actual counseling or identity intervention, or just having a space for the first time to express themselves. So you can kind of see it, for those that work with children in the room, and I know many of you do, you know, the lifespan of a child, like that, almost that image of them growing up. It's the same concept when we talk about identity and growth and support of any person, of any identity. It's a life journey for anything. And families, counselors, school systems, all of these things will support ideally that person. And if not, as a Kiwanian, knowing where we can support those individuals on their journey. So, so hopefully my example helps. I know that was a complex question, so hopefully the response wasn't too complex, but I think it's just really important that everyone's going to respond to things differently. And just when things start to bubble up, as I say, take a moment to reflect and understand that it's okay to, we need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, is what I usually tell my students. So I'll close with that.
Thank you, Karl. I love that. We have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I'm a therapist, so obviously I like that statement a lot too. But if you guys wouldn't mind joining me for a round of applause for our fantastic presenter, Karl. Just to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, this is the fourth of our monthly workshop series for the 2021-2022 Kiwanis year. So make sure to save the date for the first Wednesday of each month, 7 o'clock Eastern time, 8 o'clock Atlantic time, and there will be a lot more useful content throughout the course of the year. According to our fabulous interclub liaison, Dave Griffin, we have 15 clubs represented tonight. We have Hamilton has 5 members, Orono Old Town has 7 members. So those are our MVPs of the evening, so to speak. Karl, I forgot to mention, there were 2 comments. One of them was that they liked that you said to never force your ideas. And somebody else mentioned that you are a great presenter. You are, hold on, I can't read. You are a confident and knowledgeable speaker with a very kind and calm approach. So thank you again. Remember to encourage your fellow club members to join us for all these Kiwanis education opportunities. You can find more information on our district Facebook page, in our district Facebook group at newenglandkiwanis.org. We also have a playlist on our YouTube channel, and all of the links are going in the chat right now in what's called a link tree. So it's a consolidated link. That one link will bring you to all the ones that I just listed. And that link also has the virtual workshop series resource folder. So everything that you could possibly need in one link. We also have some pretty cool things that are going to be coming out in 2022 on our YouTube page. I'll talk more about that when they premiere, but we're going to have a couple little mini education series that are coming out. So something to look forward to. I would like to thank our district education members, Brian Cofrancesco, who is the assistant to the leadership development coordinator, and David Griffin, who is our interclub liaison, who help behind the scenes to make these monthly workshops a success. I want you to save the date for the coolest date ever, right? February 2nd, 2022. Just put all 2s in your calendar. We will be having a workshop that evening hosted by Emily Salfrank, who is our area director from Kiwanis International, and we will be talking about membership. We will also be doing 2 additional trainings in February for people who want to support other clubs. It's called a club coach. So if you're interested in learning how to support other clubs, reach out to us, education@newenglandkiwanis.org, or check any of the aforementioned resources, because we will have a link for people who are interested in helping to support other clubs as a club coach. So I want to make sure that everybody stays safe. I hope that everybody is well, and we will see you back here on Zoom on February 2nd of 2022. Have a great night and Happy New Year, everyone.